I'm going to talk to you about masculine women, feminine men, gendered spaces, and gender expression in Aristophanes Assemblywomen. You might have noticed that the title is slightly different from the one I originally gave, but essentially I'm going to be giving you my thoughts about gender and sex in the play and how we can take away messages that relate to contemporary situations. So I'll say very quickly a few words about the plot in case you're not familiar with it. Michael Scott has already said a few things about the political background and the financial background, but I'll be focusing more, as I said, on sex and gender. So this is one of the women on top plays, as it is often called. So women in Athens are exasperated with how men are dealing with the political situation. They decide to take matters in their own hands. They get dressed as men under the leadership of Praxagora, who is their leader. They get dressed as men and they infiltrate the assembly, and basically they vote themselves into power. Meanwhile, men are forced to stay at home, and we have a scene with Praxagora's husband who wakes up, he's disoriented, he has to don his wife's clothes and rush outside because he, well, quite frankly, has to do a number two. And we have the longest defecation scene that you've ever will watch in any play in antiquity. We'll get to that in a second. So after that, the women are in power, so we see the effects of the Brave New World, and they announce a permanent economic, social, and sexual revolution. So the idea is that everything will be held in common, so every citizen is to surrender their possessions to the common store, and the woman will provision every citizen equally. Civic buildings are going to be turned into communal dining halls, but most importantly, everybody is going to be able to have sex with everybody. With one clause, one cautionary note there. So as long as the people who are ugly and old are served before those who are young and beautiful. So that's the only catch. And after that, we see the implementation of the plan. So we see a man who is a skeptic and refuses to hand over his property, and a long scene with three old women who are basically fighting over a young man, fighting over to have sex with a young man who is desperately trying to have sex with his young girlfriend, but doesn't succeed. So that's more or less it, just to give you an idea of what I'll be focusing on. So I was thinking, what does a play have to say about gender and sex that is still relevant? Unfortunately, a lot. So there is a lot that hasn't changed since the time, and this is not because Aristophanes is so clever and predicted everything, it's because we're so slow with progress. So I'm going to talk about the idea of gendered spaces, so spaces that were reserved just for men and for women in the past and the present. I'm going to talk about men's deep-seated fears about what women would do if they had the power, so the resistance of men against this idea. And then I'm going to offer you a few thoughts about gender identity and gender expression, so what the play has to say about how we express our gender identity, and if maybe we can discern some ideas about thinking outside the binary. So not just thinking men versus women, but thinking outside this binary. And the possibility of performance to challenge heteronormative constructions of gender. Okay, so. And this is not working. There we go. Sorry, I skipped a few. So talking about gendered spaces, the most explicit representation of gendering of space is a division between the public and the private domain. We know that in ancient times, the public domain belonged solely to men, whereas women were relegated in the private household, caring about, well, household chores and the children and that sort of thing. And that's quite obvious in the play. So when the women are preparing for infiltrating the assembly, and they're doing the rehearsal, one of them is bringing a knitting basket, and she's knitting while the women are making the speeches. And Praxagora is saying, "What are you doing?" She said, well, I brought this along to get some knitting done while the assembly is filling up. Filling up, stupid. Sure, by Artemis, would I be able to listen just as well while I knit? And my kids have nothing to wear. So essentially, you see how women are preoccupied with the household and the private, and it feels like they don't belong on the public realm. So they shouldn't be showing, obviously, any of that. But in modern times as well, I mean, things have changed, but unfortunately, they haven't changed that much. Nowadays, public space is quite a lot owned by men. And I'll show you an example. It's a universal phenomenon. It's very commonly seen in public transport. Manspreading. Now, how many of you have experienced that? Let's see. I thought so. So men feel that they own the public space. This is just one example. Another good example, I'm sure you've experienced it too, is being at the gym. So there are guys at the gym who grunt while they lift weights, or they slam the weight plates down, all just basically to draw attention, and again, feeling that they own the space. So this is a very specific species, and please, guys, don't be that guy. It's really annoying. So there is that too. And then, of course, when women enter the public space, they don't feel welcome there. They don't feel like they belong, because this is an example of what happens, for instance, when a woman goes out running in public. This is what she might hear from passers-by, obviously mostly men. So women feel that they have to make themselves small and invisible. And this is also true for the area of politics, so not just public spaces, but the very specific area of politics. If you look at the statistics about the percentage of women in national parliaments within European countries, they're quite disappointing. So it's only the Scandinavian countries that you can see up there that have managed to reach a percentage of up to 50%. Still not a majority, right? Just 50%, like the minimum. And, well, the UK is not really doing great. It's somewhere in the middle. I think just now it's 35%, the percentage of women in the parliament. And then, of course, you have examples of women being in politics. Does anyone recognize any of those two women? Yes? Or over there, whoever wants to speak? Thank you. And the other one? So on the right is Jacinda Ardern, who is was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And on the left, another Prime Minister from a different country in Scandinavia? Yeah? Yeah, from Finland, thank you. So does anybody know where this screenshot is taken from, what is the context, and why they look so disgusted and perplexed? Yes. Not quite, but very close. So it was during a joint press conference, and a journalist asked the two of them, who had met to discuss political matters related to both countries. And the journalist asked, so I wonder, because you're of a similar age, is this why you met? You seem to have quite a lot of stuff. Is it because you're a woman and you're of the same age? So this is what women have to deal with when they actually enter the sphere of politics. And quite recently, Jacinda actually resigned from being a prime minister. And this is what the BBC News posted on the Twitter account. This was like the front page. Can women really have it all? So this stayed online for 1 hour before people complained, and it was eventually withdrawn. The BBC, I repeat. So, yeah, these are some examples of how gender spaces are a reality even nowadays. And we know that the woman in the play fought against that. And we'll see different examples of the recent past, how women fought against such an idea. So challenging male public spaces. Now, does anyone know who this is? Yes? No? Yes? Yes, Emmeline Pankhurst, great. I was going to show you this in case you didn't get the first one, in case you've seen the movie. So that's Meryl Streep depicting the same character in the movie. And what was a big thing that she did? Why do you think I chose to talk about her just now? Yes. Yes, great, exactly. So she was exasperated by taking the peaceful and playing by the rules way of doing things. So she decided to basically found the Women's Social and Political Union, and their motto was deeds, not words. And of course, they campaigned for votes of women, for women, as you can see. So one of the things that I want to focus on, it's very closely related to what happens in our play. Does anyone know anything about that? I mean, it's right on the poster. But so what is one of the, yes, up there. Well, yeah, they did quite a lot of violent things like smashing windows and burning houses and protesting violently, but I'm referring to a very specific act which is portrayed here, both on the poster and on the photograph there. So Emmeline Pankhurst invites the audience to rush the House of Commons. So that's in October 1908. So basically, she invited people to join her in a protest and try to rush the House of Commons. Pretty much like what happens in our play, right? With the exception that these women were not dressed as men. They did it very openly. Does anyone know what happened if they were successful? What was the outcome of this? Did they manage to get into the House of Commons, you think? No, they didn't. Some people are nodding. No, they didn't, unfortunately. So there were 60,000 people that were gathered outside the Parliament Square, but there was strong police force and they couldn't break it. But we know of one woman who was actually a secretary of one of the MPs that managed to get into the chamber and shout to the men there, get to the woman's bill, because they were discussing the children's question, and they said, leave off discussing the children's question and give votes to women first. So that was the only woman that managed to get in. Perhaps if they dressed as men, they would have more chance. Right, okay, so we've talked about the suffragette movement and some of their acts. What do we know about the opposition? Because whenever there is an action, there is also a counter-action. So there was opposition, obviously, against the women's suffrage, quite a big campaign. So there was the Women's National Anti-Suffrage League that was led by a woman, because there were quite a lot of women that protested against the idea, surprisingly. And this one merged with the Men's League for Opposing Women's Suffrage to become the National League for Opposing Women's Suffrage, as you can see here. So I'm going to talk about the anti-suffragette campaign in a moment. So the idea is, what is it that men fear and some women fear? So why did men think that women shouldn't challenge their places? What are the arguments behind this? And what do these arguments betray about men's psyche and how they think about these issues? And I'm going to compare the protest, the anti-suffrage protest, to what happens in the play. So what messages the play shows, gives to us, to basically put women in their place and argue that it's not a good idea when women transgress their boundaries. So these are some of the lines, some of the argumentation you will see in both the anti-suffragette campaign and the play that I will get to in a second. So one idea is that women shouldn't be in power because they become masculinized and they look like men. Women who are interested in political power cannot be beautiful women that are just ugly, and they're also sexually deprived. All they need is really a man. Women are sexually deviant and monstrous, and they're doing this to get revenge against men because they actually want to get the upper hand in sex. So there is, as you can see, an obsession about sex there. At the same time, women are masculinized and men become feminized because by abandoning the traditional roles, they are forced to become like women. And this is actually a quote from one of the presidents of the League Against the Suffragettes. So, women lack calmness of temperament and balance of mind, especially in emergencies or on occasions of emotional excitement. And overall, of course, women are portrayed as a threat to societal stability and political order. So I'll show you some quotes from the play, and then we'll compare them to posters that were circulated against the suffragette campaign. We can see the common elements there. So this is Praxagora arguing for women taking up power. And this shows how basically by women taking up the power, they're feminizing the city. So the city becomes a giant household. She's saying, what are the arguments? The women settle down to their cooking as they always have. They carry burdens of the heads as they always have. They celebrate the thesmophoria as they always have. They bake cookies as they always have. They drive their husbands nuts, some sexism there, as they always have. They hide their lovers in the house. Remember, this is Aristophanes writing this, not actually a woman speaking. So the idea is that because they do all these things neatly in the household, they should also be able to regulate a city-state. So basically, the city-state becomes a household, and by implication, it is feminized. So after the plan is implemented, the scene I mentioned to you with the three old women fighting over the young man, this is just when Vlepiros, that's Praxagoras' husband, is talking to a neighbor. And when they find out about the revolution, Vlepiros says, well, there lies a danger for men our age. Once they've taken the reins of power, they'll force us against our will to what? To shag them. And if we can't perform, they won't make us breakfast. So it's again the fear that men will get the upper hand in sex. There will be sex craze and force men to shag them, quite frankly. So from the last scene in the play, the very last scene with the old woman fighting over the young man, the old women are portrayed as monsters from mythology and as sexual predators. So they're all hideous, they are decrepit, and they are all very, very, very eager to get together with a young man. So the first woman is saying, I know I'm loved, you were just surprised to find me outside. Come on, give us a kiss. The young man refuses, and he says, I'm terrified of your lover. Who's that? The best-selling painter. And who's that? The one who decorates funeral urns. So the idea is that she's a bride of death. So this is the painter that decorates funeral urns. So this is how ugly and monstrous she is. And the same goes with the old woman. Actually, each one of them that appears on stage is more hideous than the previous one. So the second old woman, and this is a screenshot from a production of this scene that we had with our Classic Society in Glasgow. So on the left is the second old, on the right is the second old woman, and on the left is the third old woman, and you can see the guy with his, well, fake dildo there. Hey you, where are you taking this man in violation of the law? It's plainly stated that he's got to sleep with me first. And the young man says, good grief, where did you pop out of, you apparition of damnation? This horror is more revolting than the last one. So it's kind of the same line repeated over and over again. The second old woman is trying to drag him to her house to have sex. She calls him a sissy, so you already see the reversal of roles. He asks to go to the bathroom because he's terrified of her, and he will go brown with fear, as he says. And the woman replies, back up and get moving. You can shite when we get in the house. So she doesn't even let him do that. And then the most hideous third old woman appears and steals the young man from the second one. And the young man goes, Heracles, Pan, Corybantis, Dioscuri. Here is another horror and much more revolting than the last. Please someone tell me what in the world this is? A monkey plastered with makeup? A hag arisen from the underworld? And the old woman says, cut the jokes and follow me. So she wins in the end, and she drags him while he's screaming and complaining that this is going to be his death because he won't survive the decrepit experience. So you can see all the arguments that I mentioned to you just before about women being sexual predators and monsters. And you see the opposite side of the coin with the feminization of men. So when Praxagoras' husband is forced to wear her wife's clothes to go out in the yard, there is a long description of what exactly he's wearing and the meeting with his neighbor who is wondering about his attire, and he talks about the yellow slip and the boots that he couldn't find his own boots, so he had to sleep in his shoes, the Spartan boots that his wife normally wears. So it's all meant to be ridiculing and humiliating for him, and that becomes even more evident when he is trying to do a number 2. And he cannot do it, so he's saying, what am I going to do? This is not my only worry. Where will the shite go hereafter every time I eat? As it is, this fellow has my back door bolted, whoever he is, the man from Pear Town. Well, he had just eaten a pear before, so he thinks this causes a blockage. This is a joke. Who could call me a doctor, and what kind? Any of you arsehole experts out there knowledgeable about my condition? Lady of childbirth, don't let me down when I'm bursting and bolted, lest I become a comic potty. So he compares himself to a woman squatting down for childbirth, but he's squatting down for very different reasons. So delivery is not forthcoming, obviously, and even if it comes, the product will be a turd and not a child. So he's likened to a woman giving birth, but it's even worse than that and even more ridicule than that. Right, you were expecting to hear some scatology from Aristophanes, I assume. It's normal. Right, so we'll get to the posters from the anti-suffragettes campaign to show you the same ideas here. So these are 2 posters that basically show domestic chaos because the women in the house decided to be suffragettes. And men say, this is what happens when women want to vote. So they don't do the chores in the house. If you see it, if you look at the right picture, there is a lamb there that is smoking quite dangerously. The two children are crying because they haven't been looked after. And the man arrives home and he's thinking, what on earth? Am I supposed to do all that? Well, yeah. That's another one. What happens when women vote? So women behave like men. They sit at the table, they play cards, they smoke and have chocolate, whereas the poor husbands have to do the laundry and look after the kids. And it's actually quite funny because these posters show how much women were doing and all the mental and the physical labor, and the men are trying to argue exactly the opposite of that, but it's quite obvious that they were overworked. And men, frankly, were not doing much if they were just sitting around playing cards and eating chocolate. More of that. So Ma's at the movies, and the poor dad has to look after his own kids. Who would have thought of that? What an idea. The second one is made to clean the floor, I think. And the third one is doing laundry, whereas the baby has a tete-a-tete with a cat for some reason. But this is what happens when mother is a suffragette. So women become feminized because they take up the woman's traditional roles. There is also the idea about how women are wild. So on the left-hand side, you can see a woman who is a suffragette chasing after a minister, I think, with her umbrella. And on the right, what are the wild wives saying? So they can't have a civilized meeting. They're just, talking on top of each other and being wild. There is also the over-sexualization with women, dressed in this way, as you can see on the left. And the idea here is that women are not suitable for political power because they will seduce men with their feminine guiles, and this is all they can do. And on the right-hand side is girls are doing all the fellows' jobs now, so they will even take the women that are supposed to be for us. So this is the opposite idea of the over-sexualization and women being beautiful and seductive. This is the idea of women who want the power being really ugly and sexually deprived. So on the left-hand side, you've got what essentially looks like a monster. I mean, it's a woman who looks like she's got fangs or something. And she's wearing the WSPU colors, so the suffragette colors, to show that she's a suffragette. In the middle there, you see a spinster. So what women will do when they get the power is that they will force everyone to marry. This is the idea. And the spinster, who is supposed to be really ugly here, she's saying, I'm sure I shall giggle when my time comes, because she finally gets what she wants. And on the right-hand side, it's the origin and development of a suffragette. So if you see the final image, again, she's an aggressive, insane, ugly, old woman who is just bitter because she doesn't have a man. So it's essentially the same idea over and over again. And more of that, so suffragettes who have never been kissed on the left, and on the right, at the suffragette meetings, you can hear some plain things and see them too. Again, the same idea. So, yeah, as I said, unfortunately, all these arguments against women occupying public spaces and exercise political power are not that different. Either they come from the far distant past or the more recent past or the present, really. And now I'm going to switch to the final part of the talk, where I'm going to talk a little bit about gender expression in the play. Gender expression is how a person presents themselves outwardly. So there can be various items of clothing they wear, certain types of behavior, the voice, other characteristics that are perceived as masculine or feminine by society. Of course, what is considered masculine or feminine can change over time, and it varies by culture, but surprisingly, some things remain the same. Again. So we've got a very clear idea of gender expression in the play when the women are trying to make themselves look like men. So what does this mean? They have to obviously change their clothing, so they can't wear their hitons and they can't wear their spat-on boots, so all that has to change. They also have to shave, as they say. A woman says, I threw my razor out of the house right away so that I get hairy all over and not look female at all. So hairiness is a masculine trait, apparently. Facial hair, so they all carry fake beards to put on to look like men. And also more general speech and gestures and movement. So Praxagora is advising the woman to speak worthily, let your language be truly manly, whatever this means, and lean on your staff with dignity. And at some other part of the play, the woman who is rehearsing as a speaker, she feels she has to cough because this is what men do, and they have to use specific oaths so as not to betray themselves. They can't swear by female goddesses because this is what women do. So there are a lot of traits there that are perceived as purely masculine or purely feminine, and for the woman to be successful, they have to make the full switch. Now, we have to remember, for the ancient performance, who were the people that were actors? Like, who was allowed to be an actor? How? Yes. Yes, thank you. Well, there is an argument, but it's not very convincing, that maybe women prostitutes were used on stage for some of the nude female parts, but it hasn't been accepted universally. So we know that the actors were men, so even the female parts were played by men. So this is important to remember because essentially at the beginning of the play, The Assemblywomen, we have male actors pretending to be female, pretending to be women, pretending to be male. Yeah? Male actors pretending to be female, pretending to be male. That's quite mind-boggling. So what results from all this? So basically the final product that you see on stage is a product of how a man would think that a woman would think that a man behaves, right? So keep that in your head for a moment. How a man would think that a woman would think that a man behaves. So not how a man behaves, not how an actual female actor would portray a male character, but a man pretending to be a woman, pretending to be a man. That's twice removed in a way, and it's very, very different from a modern performance. So you've got a sort of double imitation going on there, which emphasizes the artificiality of gender, or what Judith Butler, one of the most famous queer theorists, calls gender performativity. So the idea that one's gender expression is not natural, but is a learned performance. So we are used to the idea that gender is something that we are, but actually gender is something that we do. We see in the play that actors put on beards, they carry sticks, they put on items of clothing, they use certain props to act like a person of a centered gender, and we, in the same way, also perform our gender, and our performance is informed by earlier acts of performance that we have viewed, we have witnessed, we have internalized, and we have adopted. So we are a little bit like the actors, but the big difference is that the actors are aware they're performing the gender roles, whereas we are not aware of the same fact. We don't have this stable subjectivity. So all the bodily gestures, the movements, and styles of various kinds that betray our gender identity is basically an illusion. They constitute an illusion of a fixed gender identity. So since we all perform our gender identity, it's not a matter of actually doing the performance. This is forgiven. The question is, what form will our performance take? And by choosing to be different about it, by choosing to not just be different about it, but also supporting people who are different about it, we might work to change gender norms and the binary understandings of masculinity and femininity. And I'll just show you very briefly, and I will finish, I promise. I'll just show you an example from another play by Aristophanes about such a character that maybe transcends gender categories. This is the tragic poet Agathon that appears in Woman at the Thesmophoria. And I won't go on about the play because it's not important. So when he comes up on stage, he is dressed as a woman, but he lacks breasts. This is all the observations of another comic character on stage. He doesn't have the phallus, the comic stage phallus. He has both masculine and feminine objects lying around him, like both a mirror and a sword. And he claims that he changes his writing ways along with the purpose. So if his plays have a woman, he behaves like a woman. If his plays have men, he behaves like a man. So Agathon is depicting this play as unclassified. He's a disruptor of categories. He's neither fully male nor fully female. He's not grounded in a stable, recognizable body. And to bring a more contemporary example that you might be familiar with, who's that? Does anyone recognize this person? Yes. Yes. I really want to play this clip. It's very, very short. It's 40 seconds. I don't know if I'm allowed to play. Am I? Can I try? Let's see what happens. Yeah, no, I don't think we'll get to hear the song. I don't know why. But this is, does anyone remember where this is from? What part of the series this is from? He's performing a song while he's getting dressed, and he's putting makeup on and fake eyelashes. And, well, he's a very exuberant, a very lovable personality in sex education. I'm sure you know this better than I do. So Eric is another person that can be a disruptor of categories with how he presents himself and challenging other people's views of what he should look like. And I'll finish with a quote from an excellent novelist that you might have heard of, Ursula Le Guin. So she's written this novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, and she imagines a planet, Gethen is a planet, where individuals have no fixed sex and no fixed gender. And this quote is from a person who visits the planet and takes notes. And he says, when you meet a Gethenian, you cannot and must not do what a bisexual naturally does, which is to cast him in the role of man or woman. Our entire pattern of socio-sexual interaction is non-existent here. They cannot play the game. They do not see one another as men or women. This is almost impossible for our imagination to accept. What is the first question we ask about a newborn baby? And then he goes on, a man wants his virility regarded, a woman wants her femininity appreciated. On winter, this is the name of the planet, they will not exist. One is respected and judged only as a human being. So we're obviously a long way from achieving a genderless society, and this is not going to be feasible as long as we live in a patriarchal society that is governed by systemic sexism. And it is difficult enough for people who move from one end to the binary to the other one to gain acceptance, like trans people nowadays. So let alone genderqueer people, this is unfortunately a long way ahead. So for now, this idea of a genderless society only exists in the realm of fantasy as it existed in Ursula Le Guin's imagination. But perhaps there will come a time when people will be respected and judged only as human beings, as Ursula Le Guin is saying. Thank you so much.